Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
And I'm Sunny. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter what time zone you're in. Welcome back.
That is a great opening and perfect for our continuously expanding global audience. Speaking of which, our back-end data has been kind of wild lately.
It has.
Did you know our Spanish-speaking audience keeps absolutely exploding?
I did see that. I was so curious. I initially thought, oh, maybe we covered a topic they were specifically interested in, but then I realized...
What was it?
They're using us for English listening practice. We even got a listener email thanking us for it.
That is hilarious. Exactly. Our old friend Mickey also checked in. He said his English comprehension has skyrocketed thanks to our show.
That's great.
But he begged us, literally begged to lay off the academic jargon. He said he nearly crashed his car during that episode where we kept talking about, what was it?
Oh, I remember. Macrostructural capital outflow?
That's the one. He said he is so thirsty for knowledge, but that phrase made him too dizzy to focus.
Well, Mickey, today we are going to try to keep it colloquial, conversational, and easy to follow for all our listeners.
Good.
But the topic itself is anything but lightweight.
No kidding. Today we're talking about the latest economic outlook, but more importantly, the single most critical and perhaps most thirsty issue in the AI era. It turns out that the explosive growth of AI is constrained not by brilliant algorithms or chips, but by, physical limits.
That's it. Electricity, water, cooling infrastructure, and hardware density.
This isn't just a tech story. It's a global resource reallocation battle. We're going to look at this crisis from the perspective of the U.S., Europe, and Asia.
Right. To understand why AI, while generating these massive investment opportunities, is also putting huge pressure on power grids, water reservoirs, and even national climate targets.
So let's stop talking about overheated chips and start talking about the potential for an overheated planet. Grab your coffee or your hydration of choice, Sip and Talkers, and let's get started.
Today's mission is to unpack the true, measurable cost of the AI boom when AI gets thirsty. The global race for power, water, and cooling.
Okay, let's unpack this. For the last, 2 years, every conversation in tech and finance has been about pure compute power.
Oh, absolutely. Who has the biggest model? Who has the fastest chip? It was a digital arms race.
And what we're seeing now is the inevitable collision between that digital ambition and, physical reality.
Yes. The real bottleneck has shifted so dramatically, it's no longer about whether you can design a better chip.
So what is it about?
It's about the sheer physical infrastructure required to power, cool, and sustain that chip 2047 across thousands of miles of racks.
So the core challenge has become infrastructure. It's not software. It's the physical stack underneath. That feels like a profound shift in the technological landscape.
It is. We're dealing with 4 interconnected physical limits that really define the ceiling of AI growth.
Let me guess. The first is electricity, just powering the things.
That's number 1. Then there's the cooling needed to keep them from, literally melting.
Right. Then the water consumed by those cooling systems. And finally, the constraints of high-density hardware manufacturing itself. You can't solve one without impacting the others.
It's a chain reaction. If you think about it, we started this journey thinking bigger is better. We wanted the biggest, baddest AI model possible.
Of course.
Now it feels like we're hitting these resource limits that are forcing a painful but necessary pivot toward a new mantra, which is what? Smarter is better.
Smarter is better. We have to start optimizing how we use every single one of those physical resources.
So our goal here is to move past the hype and analyze the true infrastructure cost of this AI boom across the US, Europe, and Asia.
Exactly. It's time to measure the hidden thirst that defines the current technological arms race, because that thirst is what dictates global investment flow and, frankly, regional political risk.
Okay, let's start with the largest component, literally. Power. You simply cannot run these enormous language models on anything resembling a small local power source.
Not even close. The scale here is truly staggering.
Give us the number. Okay, so if you look at the 2024 data from the International Energy Agency, global data center power consumption is currently around 415 terawatt hours.
415. Okay, put that in perspective for us.
That's about 1.5% of total global electricity use, which I know doesn't sound like a lot.
Right.
But that 1.5% is equivalent to the entire power consumption of a country like, say, Turkey or Australia.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of power, and I'm guessing it's not a static number?
Not at all. It's a rapidly growing problem. The annual growth rate over the last 5 years has been hovering around 12%.
And that's compound growth.
Exactly. And it's accelerating, largely fueled by the demand for massive AI training and inference.
So if we zoom in on the U.S., where so much of this is happening, the strain must be even more acute.
It is, because they're building out capacity so quickly. U.S. data centers consumed about 183 terawatt hours in 2024, which is already 4% of the total national consumption.
4%.
And here is the real jaw-dropper. Predictions suggest this consumption could double by 2030.
Double. That is an unbelievable infrastructure challenge. That means the grid has to somehow absorb the equivalent of adding almost 2 entire New York City power grids in 6 years. Just for AI.
You can't just flip a switch and build new transmission lines and power plants overnight. It doesn't work that way.
So that's the real problem, the slow response time.
That inadequate response is precisely the problem flagged by the International Monetary Fund. The IMF warns that if the power infrastructure response is too slow...
Meaning we just can't build generation and transmission fast enough.
Exactly. It could significantly raise electricity prices for ordinary citizens and directly slow down the AI industry's growth trajectory.
And this leads us directly to the environmental paradox, doesn't it? We want AI to help us solve climate change, right?
That's the dream.
But if all this massive new power consumption comes from older, dirtier sources like reactivating coal plants or relying heavily on gas, then the very expansion of AI could negate any energy savings we've achieved in other sectors.
Right. The World Economic Forum highlights this conflict. AI should be optimizing energy use, but if its own power consumption relies heavily on fossil fuels, the expansion clashes directly with global green transition goals. It's an unsustainable feedback loop.
So what's the counterpoint? We can't just keep building power plants forever. Where does the efficiency come into play?
Well, the efficiency has to come from the models themselves. There's some hope that the sheer speed of this consumption growth might be tempered by a few factors.
Like what?
Like increased model efficiency developers are learning to optimize models to run faster on less power and, of course, better hardware design. As some reports in Nature point out, we shouldn't just assume current consumption rates will extrapolate infinitely into the future. There is a technology curve toward efficiency.
But practically right now, where are the regional bottlenecks going to bite first? Because not every grid can handle a massive new data center load.
You have to look at regions where the grid is less flexible or maybe more centralized. Places like Taiwan, for instance.
Right, a global hub for manufacturing, but an island with limited resources.
And a highly concentrated population. Or you look at emerging markets in Southeast Asia. These regions often have fantastic human capital and tech enthusiasm, but their grids might not be built to absorb the strain of a massive 247 AI data center demand without creating severe localized power outages or price spikes.
So it seems like the focus has to shift toward decentralization or perhaps smaller modular power solutions rather than continuing to rely on a traditional massive utility grid that, like you said, can take 7 years just to upgrade.
That's where the innovation is headed.
Okay, so if the electricity is the fuel, then heat is the immediate byproduct. This is where the physics of the problem become inescapable.
Absolutely. High-density computing generates immense heat, and that heat is the direct link between power consumption and our next problem, water usage.
Cooling is not optional, right? It's essential to prevent component failure, maintain stable efficiency, and just prolong the life of the hardware.
And we are far past the point where basic air cooling is a viable solution for AI-level compute.
We've seen that evolution, right? The massive air cooling systems we have now, the ones that look like giant fans on the tops of buildings, they already account for a huge portion of U.S. data center power consumption.
They do. Pew Research has some great data on that.
We're using electricity just to fight the heat created by the initial electricity. It's this expensive, inefficient cycle.
And the latest hardware makes traditional cooling completely obsolete. Take the new NVIDIA Blackwell GB200 NVL72 single cluster, for example.
Do it.
That single unit draws a staggering 120 kilowatts of power.
Wait, 120 kilowatts for one cluster?
One cluster. That amount of heat concentrated in such a small footprint simply cannot be managed by air. It's physically impossible.
So that necessitates the shift to liquid cooling, which is the undeniable trend right now.
Precisely. The adoption of liquid cooling, specifically what's called cold plate technology, where chilled liquid runs directly over the processor, is set to explode.
How big of an explosion are we talking?
Well, in 2024, its penetration was only about 15%, but projections show it exceeding 60% by 2027.
Wow, in just 3 years.
This rapid shift highlights just how severe the heat problem has become and how fast.
But the real technological leap seems to be immersion cooling. I mean, dunking servers in liquid sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's real.
It is very real, and it is the current peak of efficiency. Single-phase and two-phase immersion cooling involves submerging the server racks entirely into a special dielectric fluid.
And the benefit is just better heat transfer.
Much better. This approach offers an incredible 30 to 50 times better heat dissipation than air cooling. More importantly, it can drive the power usage effectiveness, or PUE, down to an almost perfect 1.03.
Okay, let's quickly define PUE for Mickey and our global listeners. What is that?
PUE is simply the ratio of the total energy used by a data center to the energy actually used by the IT equipment inside it.
So if you have a PUE of 2.0.
You're using 1 watt of power for compute and 1 watt just to cool and light the building. A PUE near 1.0 means almost every single watt is going toward the actual computation, which is the holy grail of efficiency.
And immersion cooling gets you almost there.
It gets you very close.
That sounds like a technological silver bullet. But if immersion cooling is so efficient, why is adoption still so low, hovering around that 15% mark? What's the real-world barrier stopping everyone from dunking their servers today?
That's a really great question. The barriers are cost, retrofit complexity, and supply chain maturity.
So it's just expensive.
It's very expensive to implement, especially if you're trying to retrofit older air-cooled data centers. Plus, the specialized dielectric fluids require specific handling and supply chains that are still scaling up. So while the technology is superb, the implementation is costly and slow.
And location still matters, right?
Yeah.
Even with advanced liquid cooling.
Massively. Data center knowledge points out that building data centers in hot, dry, or water-scarce regions is an extremely high risk.
Why is that?
Because you might solve the immediate chip heat with liquid, but your backup evaporative cooling systems, or the generators, will still draw heavily on local water resources, creating massive operational and political risks.
And you also have to consider humid climates.
Right, like Taiwan, which requires special consideration for dehumidification, adding another layer of complexity and power draw to the whole cooling equation.
So location becomes a strategic liability or an asset. But there's a massive opportunity here too, right? Using that waste heat.
Absolutely. This is the circular economy model for compute. In places like Northern Europe and Denmark, companies like Aztec have systems that capture that waste heat and repurpose it.
For what?
For thermal power generation or feeding it into district heating systems for local homes and businesses. You're not just cooling, you're converting waste into a usable energy resource. That's the model the future demands.
So now we've hit the third pillar. Water. This is truly the invisible thirst of AI and often the source of the most intense community friction.
It really is. We think of data centers as these clean, dry places, but their cooling systems are incredibly water-intensive.
Specifically the cooling towers and evaporative systems.
They are the current industry norm, and they require huge amounts of water to reject the immense heat being generated.
And the numbers are just shocking. In 2023, U.S. data centers alone used an estimated 66 billion liters.
Which is about 17 billion gallons.
Of water directly for cooling. And that's
Yeah.
just the direct consumption.
Right, that ignores the water needed to generate the electricity they consume in the first place or to manufacture the chips.
We're only beginning to quantify AI's specific consumption footprint, and it's stunning.
The sheer scale of training large models is unbelievable. Training the foundational model, GPT-3, for example, consumed an estimated 700,000 gallons of water.
700,000 gallons. For one training run, that's enough to fill a large swimming pool.
And that's just to get the model started. The consumption continues in the inference stage, when you're actually chatting with the AI.
Oh, wow.
One study calculated that every 1,000 dialogues you have in inference consumes roughly 500 milliliters of water.
So every time you ask ChatGPT a question, a measurable amount of water is being consumed somewhere just to manage the heat generated by that answer.
That's it. And this translates directly into the corporate financials and environmental reports. Microsoft's global water consumption was up a massive 34% in 2023.
34%.
Google's was up 22%. These aren't small percentage increases on small numbers. These are hyperscalers dramatically increasing their drain on local water resources year over year.
Which, naturally, leads directly to social conflict. We saw this play out in the U.S. Southwest.
S&P Global noted that locating data centers in water-stressed areas like arid regions of Arizona creates significant operational and community conflict risks.
We've already had genuine protests against Google data centers in Arizona over water use.
Of course. I mean, imagine living through a multi-year drought and then a new industrial facility moves in that consumes millions of gallons of your precious potable water just to cool its computers. The pushback is inevitable and completely understandable.
So water moves from being just a utility cost to a major political risk.
Exactly. The good news is that solutions do exist, and not all regions face the same existential risk.
Okay, like what?
Strategies include using non-potable water, leveraging seawater cooling where coastlines permit, and mandating highly efficient closed-loop or recycled cooling water systems.
So it means shifting the mindset to ensure the infrastructure actually fits the local environment.
Yes. If a region is already water-stressed, policy has to either limit the size of the data centers or mandate these water reuse mechanisms. As ezii.org highlights, aggressive water recycling is no longer optional. It's a required license to operate in many competitive markets.
Okay, let's move to the fourth pillar, the hardware itself. The unrelenting demand for these massive AI models creates a chain reaction in the supply chain that then just makes the power and cooling issues we talked about even worse.
It's a fundamental feedback loop. Larger models demand more powerful GPUs and TPUs, higher memory bandwidth, and faster internal connectivity.
Which all means?
All of that means exponentially more heat and exponentially more power draw per square meter.
We see this reflected in the power draw of the components before they even hit the data center floor.
We do. Research from ArcCuff showed that a single 8-GPU node draws about 8.4 kilowatts just during the training phase. As that density increases, the heat load becomes the central design challenge for the entire system.
This forces us to ask some tough questions of the developers and the industry, which, frankly, often go unasked.
Such as?
Is the priority just achieving sheer scale because it looks good in a press release, or are they genuinely prioritizing model efficiency? Is bigger truly better if the resource cost and the resulting e-waste footprint are just astronomical?
And we often ignore the issues that follow the initial build. Maintenance, constant updates, and then the massive electronic waste, the e-waste.
Right. The resource demands don't end when the server is built. Yeah. They continue until it's decommissioned and the component parts are disposed of, often in an environmentally unsound manner.
So the critical metric for the future isn't just TFLOPS, trillions of floating point operations per second. It has to be FOPS per watt.
FOPS per watt. How much computation are we getting for every single unit of energy consumed?
That has to be the new focus for design. And that search for efficiency is what's driving the most exciting technological leaps right now.
Like what? What are we seeing?
Well, we're seeing technologies like chiplet photonic interconnect, or CPO.
Okay, break that down.
Think of it this way. Instead of moving data around the chip using slow, energy-consuming electrical wires like traffic jams on city streets, CPO uses tiny beams of light photons to transmit data between chiplets.
So it's basically replacing copper wires with fiber optics inside the chip package.
Precisely. This dramatically reduces the electrical to optical loss when data moves, making the entire chip system vastly more energy efficient.
And what else?
We also have processing in memory, or PM, which cuts the power lost by simply moving data back and forth between the memory and the processor.
How does that work?
It's like performing math right where the numbers are stored instead of shipping them across the room every time you need to do a calculation.
That makes a lot of sense. So that sets the stage for the physical limits. Now let's zoom out and look at the financial context. Building out all this infrastructure, the power plants, the liquid cooling, the new grids, it all costs an astronomical amount of money.
A staggering amount.
How is the global economy dealing with this price tag?
Well, the spending is huge, and in the U.S., that AI CapEx flood is one of the main factors propping up the current economy, which frankly, is a bit squishy.
Squishy is the perfect word. We're facing headwinds from high interest rates and slower hiring, yet we keep avoiding a major recession. It's a very strange moment.
What's truly fascinating is how narrowly focused the U.S. economy's resilience is. It relies almost entirely on what some analysts are calling the 3 A pillars for its stability.
Okay, let's break down those A's because I think they explain the fragility of this current moment.
First, you have affluent consumers. They're driving the vast majority of U.S. spending. Their finances are holding up. They have stable bank balances and are still making large purchases, keeping the retail sector moving.
Okay, pillar 1. What's number 2?
Second, artificial intelligence-driven investment. This is the CapEx flood we're discussing. The billions being spent on building data centers, power infrastructure, and buying NVIDIA chips. It's a massive injection to economic activity.
To the third A.
And third, asset price gains. This means the booming stock market, high real estate valuations, and other holdings that make the affluent consumers feel wealthy enough to keep Pillar 1 spending active.
So here's the inherent risk of the K-shaped recovery.
Exactly.
The K-shape means the top 20% are thriving, while the lower 80% are kind of struggling. If Pillar 3, asset prices, suddenly declines, say the stock market corrects, the affluent consumers immediately pull back their spending.
And when that happens, the main consumer spending engine stalls. Suddenly, the economy has lost its footing, despite all that massive AI investment.
It means the U.S. economy's resilience is highly conditional, which makes the stability of the tech sector and its CapEx spending absolutely critical.
The pressure is on these hyperscalers to keep spending fast enough to maintain that economic momentum.
And that pressure to keep spending brings us back to the cost. Because of the high power and cooling demands, building a single gigawatt of data center capacity now costs upwards of $50 billion to $60 billion.
It's mind-boggling.
How are these companies covering that CapEx?
They are building so fast to secure market share, and to cover that immense cost, they're increasingly turning to debt financing. This isn't just business as usual. This is a capital race fueled by massive amounts of borrowed money.
And we have one company that stands out as the extreme example of this debt-fueled race, Oracle.
Oh, yeah.
Their financials tell a story of aggressive AI investment that is actively making the market nervous.
Oracle is absolutely the outlier in leveraging debt for this infrastructure push. Their debt-to-equity ratio sits at an eye-watering 500%.
500%. For context, what are the others at?
For context, Amazon is around 50% and Microsoft is around 30%. Oracle is just massively leveraged to build out its cloud and AI capacity.
This is where we need to explain why that matters. The sources project Oracle's free cash flow, or FCF, will be negative, around negative $5.88 billion over the next 12 months.
That's a huge number.
What is free cash flow, and why does a negative number signal such a high risk?
So FCF is simply the cash a company generates after paying for all its expenses and capital expenditures. It's the money you have left over to pay dividends, buy back stock, or pay down debt.
So negative SCF means?
It means Oracle is currently borrowing money just to fund the construction and growth of its AI infrastructure. They are relying fully on the debt markets to keep the lights on and the expansion moving.
And the financial market is clearly worried about this.
Very worried. Barclays actually downgraded Oracle's bonds due to the risk associated with this AI debt binge.
Yeah.
That's a rare move for a tech giant.
It is. And we saw their credit default swap quotes.
The CDS quotes, yeah. They surged to a 2-year high of 84.46 basis points.
Explain what a CDS quote is.
A CDS quote is essentially insurance against a corporate default. When that price goes up, it means bondholders are getting nervous about the company's ability to pay back its debt. This is the financial market flashing a serious warning sign about the physical cost of AI infrastructure.
Now compare that to the competition. Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft are all increasing CapEx aggressively.
They are.
But they have these robust, cash-generating core businesses, e-commerce, search, advertising software that generate enormous cash flow.
Which means they can largely cover their CapEx and remain FCF positive, or at least balanced. They're spending from profit, whereas Oracle is spending from borrowing.
And then you have Apple, which is playing an entirely different, almost defensive game.
Completely different. Their CapEx is extremely low, around $14 billion, compared to Microsoft's projected $94 billion.
Right. They aren't building these massive data centers. They're relying on strategic partnerships to integrate external models into what they call Apple Intelligence.
Exactly. This low-leverage approach makes Apple a defensive, industry-focused asset during all this CapEx volatility. They are integrating, optimizing, and profiting without taking on the massive resource and debt risks associated with building out the fundamental infrastructure.
So we have all this money, much of it borrowed, being spent on infrastructure. But is the AI revenue actually materializing fast enough to justify this incredible expenditure and debt load?
Not yet. And this is the third major financial pressure point. The adoption rate of AI in businesses is high.
Okay.
Something like 88% of firms are using AI in some function. But the depth of that integration is very shallow.
That's a crucial distinction. We're talking about firms just experimenting with ChatGPT or using simple automation tools.
Right. Only 7% of firms have achieved full integration, where AI is truly foundational to their operation. A huge majority are still in the experimental or pilot application phase.
Which means they're buying expensive software licenses, but they haven't reorganized their business processes to extract the maximum value yet.
Exactly. So the revenue generated from all those expensive, large-scale AI software purchases is still relatively low. The return on that staggering capital expenditure is lagging way behind the speed of the debt-fueled build-out.
And the slow return is happening while the global competition is just intensifying.
It is. China, for instance, is rapidly closing the generative AI capabilities gap. They jumped from 1,100 points to 1,450 points in capability score over just 18 months, despite facing GPU export restrictions.
That is an amazing feat of engineering and optimization given the chip limits they face.
They are achieving this through a strategy called compute bundling. Since they can't get the single best chips, they are aggregating vast quantities of weaker domestic chips to stack up their overall compute capacity.
That's a volume strategy.
It's a volume strategy, and it puts enormous pressure on U.S. hyperscalers to keep spending at maximum velocity, which just further accelerates the global capital expenditure competition and deepens that debt addiction.
Okay, let's broaden our scope and see how this resource crunch looks regionally. The U.S. and Europe are approaching this foundational challenge with radically different philosophies.
Very different philosophies, which creates different pressure points.
So what defines the U.S. situation?
The U.S. situation is defined by two words: scale and speed. They have the capital, the foundational technology, and a massive existing data center footprint. They are building faster than anyone else, but this speed carries significant risk.
The numbers confirm the dominance. The IEA reports that U.S. data centers could account for nearly half of future national electricity demand growth by 2030.
Half. That level of consumption will radically reshape the entire U.S. energy landscape.
And we are already seeing regional pressure points in specific states.
We are. In places like Arizona and Oregon areas historically attractive for data center construction because of cheap land or tax breaks, these facilities already account for 7% or more of the local grid usage.
7%. That is a concentrated burden that leads directly to higher localized electricity prices.
It does.
So what's the upside? They have the ability to adapt, right?
The upside is huge technical infrastructure, deep pools of capital, and the ability to integrate green energy solutions quickly. We see U.S. companies actively signing power agreements directly with next-gen nuclear plants to secure stable, low-carbon energy 24/7. That kind of private investment capacity is unique.
But the downside is the rapid speed and high concentration.
Exactly. We mentioned the slow grid approval cycle, 7 years on average, which means AI demand is completely outstripping the planning cycle of traditional utilities. The rapid construction threatens local grids, increases electricity prices, and intensifies resource competition, particularly for water in the U.S. Southwest. The sheer pace of the U.S. build-out is creating inevitable local friction.
Now let's look at Europe.
Europe, on the other hand, views AI as strategic, but they are proceeding with a heavy dose of policy and caution baked in from the start. They often prioritize long-term environmental targets over immediate speed.
That makes sense, given Europe's history of strong environmental regulation.
That's right. Europe is accelerating its AI infrastructure build-out, but water consumption growth is particularly alarming there.
How alarming?
Some regions, especially in Southern Europe, are predicting data center water use could grow by a massive 52% annually.
52%. That's faster than even the rapid U.S. growth rate we discussed earlier.
It is, which suggests that the existing European data centers are potentially less water efficient, or they are just building in highly water-stressed regions.
This creates immediate tension, particularly because Europe has such strong policy drivers.
The prime example is the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, which aims for carbon neutrality by 2030. They have an aggressive deadline to meet.
So they have these aggressive green goals, but the reality on the ground, especially in the warmer, drier parts of Southern and Eastern Europe, is conflicting.
Completely. It's hard to be carbon neutral if your cooling system is straining the local environment.
And in places like Spain and Greece,
which already face high water stress and hot climates, the sheer volume of cooling water needed has led to significant local controversy. You're trying to meet a major carbon neutral target, but the necessary water use is creating fierce local opposition, sometimes leading to construction halts or legal challenges.
This presents a major trade-off for Europe then.
It does. While policy is pushing for sustainability, the high European energy costs, combined with these climate and water challenges, might push large-scale capex investments toward cheaper regions like parts of Northern Europe where cooling is naturally easier, or even outside the continent entirely.
It's the constant tug-of-war between policy ideals and economic reality.
Right. The U.S. prioritizes speed and scale, risking local resource conflicts. Europe prioritizes sustainability and policy, risking a higher cost of operation and potentially slower overall growth. But both face these physical limits.
So if electricity, cooling, water, and debt are the bottlenecks, where the solutions, this is the sell the shovel section, right? Where we look at the industry's position to benefit from solving the AI resource crunch.
Exactly. And the immediate, non-negotiable growth area is liquid cooling. Since the new chips are just too hot for air, investment is flooding into the liquid cooling supply chain.
Specifically, the component makers.
Yes. We're talking about the specialized supply chain for the CDU, the cooling distribution units. These are the systems that manage and circulate the chilled liquid through the server racks. That's a massive, stable growth market because every major data center is going to need them.
Okay, what's next?
Next is industrial water management. Because water is becoming a major political and compliance risk post-2026. Remember, the Google Arizona protests companies need regulatory compliance insurance built into their operations.
And that comes in the form of what? Closed-loop cooling.
Closed-loop cooling and sophisticated wastewater reuse technology.
Can you give us a concrete example of that kind of water solution?
Absolutely. Global water technology companies like Xylem are providing closed-loop systems globally. But here's a fascinating specific example. Taiwan's ITRI developed black water processing technology for data centers.
Black water process.
This takes industrial water that traditionally would be unusable and cleans it to a high standard, making it perfectly reusable for cooling. They've already exported this technology to places like Singapore, which highlights how necessity is driving innovation in resource-constrained regions.
Then there's power generation and grid stability, which remains the single biggest, most frustrating bottleneck.
It is. We talked about the U.S. grid upgrade, lag 7 years, average approval time.
So the industry is looking at ways to leapfrog that slow grid.
They're looking at 3 key solutions. First, small modular reactors, or SMRs. Companies like NuScale and GE Hitachi offer compact 72-megawatt modules that can be deployed faster and closer to the data center.
Which offers stable, low-carbon power that AI requires 247, right where it's needed.
Exactly. Second is hydrogen fuel cells.
Microsoft is making big moves here, right?
Massive moves. They signed an 8-gigawatt hydrogen fuel cell deal with Plug Power. This represents a significant long-term wager on hydrogen as a clean, on-site power source that can be decoupled from the traditional utility grid.
And third, decentralized solutions like microgrids and virtual power plants.
These are key for stability. For microgrids, we're seeing companies like Delta Electronics providing specialized UPS systems for these high-density AI data centers with order visibility stretching out until 2027.
And virtual power plants.
VPPs, based on models like NLX, allow data centers to sell their stored or excess power back to the grid during periods of low training or low compute demand. This stabilizes the overall grid and allows the data center to monetize its compute idle time.
Okay, you just established that AI fundamentally needs stable, low-carbon SMR power. Yet when we look at NuScale, one of the leaders in the SMR market, their stock price has struggled.
It has.
Why the disconnect between perfect demand and poor stock performance?
This is a perfect illustration of the gap between long-term potential and short-term commercial reality.
Okay.
The long-term structural appeal is undeniable. AI data centers need stable, dense, low-carbon electricity, and SMRs are a textbook fit for that need.
But the short-term reality of a pure concept stock is brutal.
It's brutal. NuScale stock dropped primarily because of fundamental business execution issues. They are unprofitable, their cash flow is unstable, relying heavily on government grants rather than stable, multi-year commercial contracts, and they've faced shareholder sell-offs due to project delays.
So even though the concept is perfect for AI's structural demands, the company itself is a high-risk, high-reward bet.
Because the technology is not yet fully commercialized and generating stable revenue, investors currently prefer stable, profitable nuclear operators or utility providers who are already meeting today's massive energy demands.
So NuScale represents the future, but until they can transition from concept to consistent commercial cash flow, their stock will remain highly volatile.
Exactly, regardless of how much AI needs nuclear power.
We've established that the resources are the limit. So the ultimate technological solution, the one that truly decouples AI growth from resource demand, has to be increased efficiency at the chip and model level.
Yes. The industry must pivot away from sheer scale to focusing intensely on metrics like FLOPS per watt. And we are seeing incredible gains, driven by the pressure of those 120 kilowatt chips. NVIDIA's newest architectures, for example, are showing a 30-fold increase in inference energy efficiency compared to the previous generation.
30-fold?
Yeah.
And what are the key technologies driving this efficiency? We briefly touched on them, but let's elaborate.
We covered CPO chiplet photonic interconnect, which Broadcom expects to mass produce by 2026. This is essential for cutting power lost in high-speed data transmission by replacing electrons with light.
Right. When you move data faster and with less friction, you save massive amounts of energy.
NPM, processing and memory.
Which reduces data movement.
Right. It fundamentally reduces data movement and the associated power loss. Instead of constantly shuttling data between the CPU, GPU, and the memory bank, you process the data right where it lives. This drastically cuts the energy spent on non-computational tasks.
And we're even seeing brain-inspired computing, which is the ultimate efficient architecture.
That is the frontier of the research. Successors to chips like IBM's True North are aiming for inference consumption running the AI in the milliwatt range. If AI can run on power levels similar to your cell phone or a tiny sensor, that changes the entire resource conversation globally.
And finally, the business model itself is reflecting this focus on efficiency.
It is. The rise of compute leasing platforms like CoreWeave, which is now valued in the tens of billions, signifies a shift toward renting efficiency and optimization rather than just raw, brute force chip ownership.
So companies want to rent the FLOPS per watt, not just the raw TFLOPS.
That's it. It's the market naturally seeking the most resource-efficient way to access compute power without carrying the full burden of infrastructure, CapEx, water risk, and heat management.
So we covered an enormous amount of ground, from the debt-fueled U.S. economy and the fragility of the K-shaped recovery to Taiwan's innovative wastewater processing and the global race for efficient cooling. What is the core takeaway for our listeners?
The core takeaway is simple but defining. The central bottleneck for AI has definitively shifted from software and algorithms to the physical limits behind compute power.
Sustainable electricity, efficient cooling, water management, and high-density hardware operation.
And those factors are inextricably linked. More power leads to more heat, which requires more cooling, which typically means more water. A failure in one area, like the local water scarcity in Arizona or Greece, can halt the entire infrastructure build-out, regardless of how fast you can buy the newest GPUs.
We must move past the idea that compute is a purely digital commodity.
It is physically grounded in real resources, and the market is now rewarding the shovel sellers, the companies that solve the physical infrastructure problems, with stable, predictable demand that far outstrips the volatile chip market.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. If we accept that the new metric is efficiency over scale, we need to shift the AI mindset from biggest is best to most efficient is best.
We've seen the macro trends and the financial risks. Now consider the local impact.
Think about your own community. What local consequences, higher energy costs because of grid strain, increased water competition, or environmental protests might you experience if a massive multi-gigawatt data center were built near you?
That shift from abstract technology to physical infrastructure is happening in your backyard right now.
As always, we are here to provide objective facts and analysis for critical thinking. We don't endorse any particular viewpoint. We just try to convey these complex ideas as simply and clearly as possible for our global audience.
Thank you for joining us for this intensive look at AI's physical limits.
If you enjoyed this Sip and Talk, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
He's got fun memes, travel vlogs.
And he promises he's going to stick to talking about travel and not complex financial derivatives.
We'll catch you next time.